So I'm going to walk you through this material on postmodernism. Postmodernism isn't just one thing. It's not one set of characteristics. It's not one approach in standard use. So this material I've borrowed from another source gives you some of the characteristics, some of the things we seem to see. Modernism was, although it was a time of experimentation, it was a very it was a time when things could be quantified, they could be defined, they could be pinned down. Um, Things were more rational, and there was a particular style, and you knew what that style was, and you could call something by that style. Postmodernism, kind of from the 1970s onward, is a different way of looking at the world. So this material refers to literature and art and music and everything. In fact, at the end of this, if you scroll down far enough, you'll see discussions about art. To me, it's sort of helpful to see visually these terms that you're going to use to talk about literature. It helps, I think, sometimes to see it in play in visual art as well. So let's go back to the beginning here. So in postmodernism, you have a continuation of the idea of experimentation, except there's no longer, there doesn't seem to be any longer the desire to make sure your reader is understanding your experience. The idea is to get your experience out there regardless whether if anybody else relates to it or can understand it. So like you see a lot of stream of consciousness writing where I just start talking about how the sunlight looks on the water, and it doesn't really matter to me if you understand what the heck I'm talking about or not. Even if I didn't mention sunlight and water, I'm just experiencing the day. If you don't get that I'm looking at sunlight on water, I as an artist really don't care. All right, so the emphasis is more on how I as an artist experience the world rather than trying to convey that experience to the reader. We move away from that omniscient third-person narrator, and omniscient means a narrator that knows everything that's going on. Something like we had at Daisy Miller at the beginning, where the author told us all about what Daisy was thinking and what Winterbourne was thinking, what everybody else was thinking. We're moving away from that, and sometimes we even have points of view, multiple points of view of a particular event. We might get Henry's point of view and Sue's point of view and the dog's point of view, and that outsider view of the dog or servants or the underclass, the homeless, people on the margins. These sorts of voices come to the forefront where they have not been in the past. So different ethnicities, different cultures, you'll see more and more works by different points of view. Genre limits sort of break down. So you see this a lot in TV shows where in the past, a mystery was a mystery, a horror story was a horror story, and a romance was a romance. So now you can have all of those blended into one. So genres and media sort of all break down, their distinctions break down, and TV can be more about music, and music can be more about news. It just all gets blended together. A lot of fragmentation, a lot of collage sort of work. I was just explaining it to my daughter, that in architecture, for example, you have a sort of sense of a collage. You might have in a building a Victorian roof line and a mid-century modern garage, and you might have Corinthian columns out front. So there is no longer the requirement that one particular style be adhered to. A lot of fragmentation. Fragmentation is probably the biggest catch term for modernism, this idea that nothing is stable anymore. So we learn more about the production of the art itself. It's not just the product that's being sold, but the process going into it. A kind of look at consumerism and what consumerism does to the art form. Minimalist designs are often in favor. Things that have to do with spontaneity and creativity as opposed to rigid adherence to any particular theme or guidelines. The line between high and low starts dissolving. So a Oh, I know what I saw the other day. It was a fellow was wearing a T-shirt. I was watching a video on video game design, and the fellow had on a T-shirt, and the image on the front of the T-shirt was it was a very famous painting of Napoleon Bonaparte on a horse, and this horse is rearing back on its back legs. So you can just probably Google that, Napoleon on a horse, and you'll see the image I'm talking about. It's very famous. In this young man's T-shirt, Napoleon, um, as he is depicted on this horse, a very famous highbrow art form, you see it in a museum. Instead of being on the horse, he was on a motorcycle or some kind of, I don't know if it was a because I just got a quick look at it, a vehicle from Star Wars, one of those little speeder things, or if it was a motorcycle, I can't remember, but something like that. Obviously, the high art of Napoleon was mixed with this low art of film or just the cultural motorcycle sort of thing. That distinction between high and low begins to blur, and the world is meaningless, fragmented and meaningless. We don't come together anymore. Think of music. When I was growing up, um, you had rock and roll, you had rhythm and blues, and you had country western. And that was it. Those three categories were pretty much it. And I'm not talking about art like, classical music, but those were the kind of three types of art, of music. So people listened to particular types of music, and everybody knew what the top 40 songs were. So when we talk at reunions about our favorite songs, there are songs that everybody knew. Probably even the people in the other groups who didn't listen to them because there weren't as many radio channels and things like that. Today, I can listen to music anywhere. I can see, thousands of groups on Pandora or on the internet, in different venues. There's not the same cohesiveness between people. Just because you graduated from high school in a certain year doesn't mean you have a certain selection of music that everybody from your year would have been familiar with, because you can get music from everywhere. So this idea of fragmentation, that all of our experiences aren't the same anymore, is a large part of postmodernism. Let's see, one more here. Where did it go? Here. And again, I sort of mentioned this earlier, the idea of large ethnic groups. You used to have Asian American writing, Latin American writing. Now you have South Indian writing, you have Pakistani writing, you have Vietnamese writing. We're further and further fragmenting down to particular identities in people's writing. The world is just, at the same time it's getting bigger, it seems to be getting smaller. Very, very interesting paradoxical phenomenon that postmodernism plays with. So I hope that you can read this yourself, of course, but I think sometimes maybe it just helps to hear someone else say some of these things out loud. The rest of the presentation here is just about art and some of the postmodernism things you see in art. And you could find lots more characteristics of postmodernism, but I think these are enough to get you started for this week's assignment.